Well, as we look at these temptations of Jesus here in going into the wilderness and looking at what's happening, um, is temptation something that is unique to this point in time, or do you see it all through Scripture?
You absolutely see it all through Scripture, and it's one of those things. I think even as Christians, we like to think that at some point I'm going to become immune to temptation and things of this sort, uh, and obviously the hope of sanctification is that we stop sinning. But if we think that we're going to stop being tempted, I think we're sadly mistaken.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the Greek word for temptation, it comes from the word to attest, to test something or to try something. And there seems to be a lot of instances in Scripture where people are put to the test. You can think of Abraham being put to the test if he's going to sacrifice his son. You can think of just the Israelites in general as they go through the wilderness. Why does testing seem to be such a big theme throughout Scripture?
I don't know. Obviously being an educator, I think of testing and the role it plays. And one, if people know there's a test, then they put a little more effort into things of this sort. But two, the test is the thing that actually reveals what actually exists, what is
Right.
there, and without that test, you just don't know what actually is there.
Yeah, would in your mind any way of really knowing things without the idea of testing?
Maybe there's a possibility of knowing some things, but I don't think we're ever going to make it evident that they're known.
Okay. If you look at the scientific method as an example, is there any way to know anything through the scientific method without testing?
No.
And so what's fascinating is, we've come to the point in let's say the development of society where we've developed this idea of the scientific method, and it's really interesting that at the heart of that is something that's so ancient. It's really part of the whole background and understanding of what it means to know anything in any way. So we spend a lot of time, I think, in our lives bemoaning the fact that we get put to the test, or complaining about the test, or avoiding the test. Why do you think it is we have such an aversion to that?
Because we often don't perform well on the test.
Okay.
So we'd like to just avoid that test in the future. But also, we're creatures of comfort, and we want the easy path. We just do.
Okay. How do you approach a student who really wants to learn and really wants to avoid testing?
That is a difficult question. I once had a mother who was taking a course, and her son was going through ASU at exactly the same time, and he wasn't doing so well, and she was trying to do everything for him.
Mm-hmm.
She was trying to arrange his schedule and his study schedule, and she was trying to help him with his papers to the point where she was probably doing more than he was, and she just asked my advice, and I said, let him fail. And if you don't like studying and you don't like getting prepared for the test, fail, and maybe that'll be, but I don't know of a greater motivation than failing a few tests or something to get there.
Yeah, so Scripture tells us that God does not tempt us, and yet we see many instances in Scripture where tests seem to be largely arranged by God. And you can think of Job, you can think of Abraham and the sacrifice, and what's the difference?
When the Bible said that God does not tempt, I think the idea is that God does not tempt us to sin and tempt us to walk away from Him and things of this sort. But the test is there to reveal really the depth of our faith. And it's one of those things that, if you fail that test, that can be redeemed as long as you're willing to meet that failure with humility.
So would you say that intention is a large part of the difference between temptation and testing?
Sure, I can go for that.
Okay, so I think it'd be fair to say that Satan intends for us to choose him. God intends for us to choose him. Would you say that that's fair?
That seems fair.
Okay. In this situation, we all as human beings then have a choice to make, and how should we view testing or temptation from a looking at what Jesus goes through here in Matthew 4 and just looking at all the rest of Scripture, what's a healthy way for us of approaching temptation and testing?
Honestly, I think it's the path to true glory. And, it doesn't mean, glory is easy or anything like this, and that the path is not, going to leave some scars and things of this sort. But, in Hebrews, we get a window that Jesus is made complete. He's perfected by what he suffered. And if Jesus, who is sinless, himself is being made complete and his ministry made complete by what he suffered, that's something to aspire to. There's no good biography out there of somebody who had an easy life and then did some amazing things after that. They all almost entirely entail a fair amount of suffering.
Yeah, it seems to me that we have this weird attitude toward temptation and testing, where when we were 16 years old, I remember, at least in my case, I couldn't wait to get out and drive, and really there's an embrace of testing there, because you want to go out and see what the car is capable of. You want to see what you're capable of, and there's a joy in finding that out. There's a joy in finding the limits, and you find the limits of both, right? If you get out there and you probably at 16 have a car that's something of a piece of garbage, and and you get out there and you want to see how fast it'll go, and the speedometer goes a little bit over 80 and it starts to wobble and shake, and then you're testing yourself, how much guts do I have to see what this car is capable of? But you don't generally look at that as some kind of chore, and yet you go for your driver's test, and all of a sudden you get really nervous. And so what do you think causes that dichotomy that we have of really the enjoyment of testing versus the fear or a desire to avoid testing?
A big part is fear of failure, and that process of being evaluated and found wanting, if you will. There's nothing pleasant about that, right? But there is that joy on the other side of actually succeeding and passing the test, if you will. And it's one of those things, for a driving test, the stakes aren't super high. But man, there's some tests in life further on that the stakes are.
Yeah, it seems like in life, most of the enjoyment comes from testing, and you look at all the competitions that are out there, whether it's a chili cook-off or a NASCAR race. You look at just if you can get a new jet ski, and the first thing you want to do is just go out there and find out what it's capable of, and you want to constantly be putting your skills to the test and improving them at music, learning an instrument, and so it seems to me that really a lot of the problem with us in testing is pride. We're okay with knowing or finding out for ourselves what the limits are, but we don't want other people knowing what our limits are. How do you avoid that pride when it comes to testing?
That's a good question. I think one, don't take yourself too seriously. But two, at the end of the day, learning to put a greater value on God and other people than on yourself, I think is it. Also embracing failure. Failure is not a bad thing unless you let it be the end.
Right.
But you have the choice every single time to not let it be the end.